The night before. I would never deny it, not even in jest. I love Harry. And being separated from him is going to be tough. Not just physically tough. What's physically tough to us? We're the kings of physically tough. I mean tough in unimaginable ways. We've literally shared every moment of each other's lives for 20 years. So how can it not be tough? It's like losing an arm and a leg. That's funny, isn't it? Of course, we will lose an arm and a leg. But as I said earlier, that's the easy part. It's losing Harry that's going to be tough. He's always been there. He knows I'm nervous, and I can feel that he is too. It tingles in our blood. We reach out to each other and lean our heads back to establish contact. Lots of people find it strange that we need to reach out to each other. Why? He's Harry and I'm Sam. Don't you reach out to your brother when you want reassurance? There are so many things that Harry has always done for us because he's the take charge type. Like the bank. We have separate accounts. That was Mum and Dad's insistence on keeping our individual identities separate. We had to get a court ruling to get them, but we're used to fighting for our own rights. Anyway, Harry always does all the bank work. Not the decisions, mind. I make my own. But he does all the legwork. Man, have you ever noticed that English has so many body part analogies? We can see that other people mostly have one complete set of body parts for themselves. And Harry and I share our something less than 2 sets. And I guess I'm just more sensitive today because the old order is changing. So, as I was saying, Harry does the bank work, but he hates laundry. I do that. I guess I can still do his. I find ironing relaxing. It's the folding that's tough because his side is always so much messier. But that only matters when packing. Otherwise, it all goes on hangers. Which is most of the time, since traveling is such a humongous ordeal. I readily understand that we are not standard size. But we always have to pay extra for that. So then what's the fuss about? We've always had to accommodate, adjust, do without, everywhere. Except in our own cocoon of home, hospital, and friends. Almost anything we want to do has to be customized for us. Never been able to just hop to it, have we? Maybe that's why we've come to this pass. No maybe about it. That is why. Better to be half a man than 1.5, we've joked. But we both know it's no bloody joke. It's major, major, major surgery with all kinds of possible complications. Not some routine appendectomy or even a cardiac bypass, which they knock off by the dozen every day, getting better and better every time. As usual, ours is customized for us. They'll only ever do it once, so they have to get it right the first time. And even if all goes perfectly, 20 years of age, we are both going to have to start again with a new set of adjustments. And this time, each of us has to do it on our own. Decide everything all by ourselves. Not something we've done before. We've always had each other to lean on. And that's if all goes well. They've told us quite bluntly that it may not, that one or both may not survive. We've talked about it, and yeah, we've cried about it. Can Sam live without Harry? I don't know. I don't think so. I can't even imagine it. But we've They've got to take the chance. The technology is not cutting edge, but it's still a big deal. 16 hours at the very least. 4 teams of doctors, 2 operating theatres. God alone knows how many nurses, standby teams of everything and everybody, in case things start to unravel and they need more experts or just more hands. A logistical nightmare. You can tell how big a thing it is because there's nothing else scheduled for the day. They've been rehearsing for weeks and scanning and prodding and testing us for months. And Mum and Dad's faces? They've raised us to be individuals, to never compromise that. They knew it might come to this one day, but now that it's here, it's just killing them. You can almost see the lines on their faces getting deeper. It's such a big step, and they are scared. It's a life-threatening decision. And really, that's okay with us. We can roll with the punches, all 4 of us. We always have, as long as it doesn't alter life into death. I just don't know how I would deal with that. I can't face that now. Not right now. I have to put on my happy face and happy heart, or I'll spook Harry too, and he's plenty spooked already. I've been ribbing him about the luscious Luella. But girls have never come between us. We've managed. And Luella, in spite of her name that just lends itself to teasing, is a sweet thing. And if she helps Harry through what is euphemistically called the rough patch that is to follow, then I'm happy she's there for him. I think that sedative is finally kicking in. I can hear Harry's breath and feel his heartbeat, and both are slower, and I'm feeling a bit woozy myself. I lean back to touch Harry with my head before I drift off. This will be the last time I do that, I realize. We will just need to find ourselves another ritual. That's all. Tomorrow, for the first time in our lives, we will be in separate beds. There are going to be a lot of first times coming up for us. A new kind of first times. Good ones for both of us, I hope. Be strong, Harry, and stand tall. Chaco. She clutched her laptop bag and waited with a dozen or so others. Job interviews were so intimidating. She dressed carefully, dark trousers, simple striped shirt, low-heeled shoes, and her laptop bag containing everything she needed. No extra handbag, all tidy and businesslike. She hoped she'd get the job. It was exactly what she would love to be doing. Her phone was on silent, but she could see it flashing. It was her mum, and she didn't want to deal with that right now, so she put it back unanswered. But when it rang thrice, and it was Mama all 3 times, she thought she'd better check it out. "Sandhya, darling!" Her mum burst out before she could even say hello. "I have very bad news, darling. Chaco was in a car accident. It was a terrible crash, I'm told. Many cars. The ambulance couldn't even get to them. We must go. I have to be there for my brother at such a time. I know you haven't been back since. Her voice trailed away. Sandhya remained stiff and silent. But I hope you will come now. This is a time for family to be together and support each other. Her voice fell away again. Mama, this is terrible news and I'm very sorry for them. But I'm not going back there. And I don't want you and Papa to go either, though I can't stop you if you feel you must. I'll call you when I finish my interview and make all the arrangements. She felt the inquisitive eyes of the others on her. They couldn't help but hear her part of the conversation, and it must have intrigued them. She busied herself with her bag, cursing herself for taking the call in the first place. She hadn't been back to Kerala for 23 years. They used to go every summer to spend the holidays with their grandparents, and Mariamma auntie, Joseph uncle, Chaco and Susan. Chaco was the eldest, then Sanjay, then herself, and Susan was the baby. But after, she just refused to go back. Thrown such hysteric crying fits that her parents had to let it go. She'd go when she was ready, and she'd never been ready. The more she tried to block out Kerala, the more insistently the oversweet smell of jackfruit attacked her nostrils in that pristine waiting room. Across her lap, on which she'd fixed her eyes, plantations of coconut trees and banana plants swayed gently in the warm breeze. Veliamachi's off-white and gold chattayam mundu with the pretty fan shape at the back and the big gold kunukku hoops in the tops of her ears were clear in her mind's eye, and Veliapachan's soft cotton jabba mundu with its faded gold border. How severely had she kept all these sweet memories away, and how persistently they now tumbled into her head, the floodwaters released by Mama's phone call. She opened her folder and tried to focus on its contents, but she could see only the soft ripples of the backwaters behind Veliamachi's house, and the slippery steps that led down to them, and the diamonds glinting off their wet bodies as they ran and jumped repeatedly into its dark deliciousness. When they'd first gone, Sanjay and she, they'd been terribly nervous. With a patched tire tube for support and clinging desperately to a rope tied to an overhanging tree, they'd gone in, step by ginger step, squealing and crying and laughing. In those early days, one of the house staff would sit on the steps, chewing on a stalk of grass, watching them idly as they played, and calling them to order every so often. He'd called off Chaco's more harebrained schemes, so perhaps if he'd continued to come in the years ahead. But once they'd earned their stripes, he was called away to more pressing work. Sandhya snapped shut her unhelpful folder and stored it away in her bag. She left the room, looking for a drink of water and a visit to the loo, trying to break the chain of memories pressing into her mind. When she returned, she was informed she'd be next, and she dragged the straggling wisps of her attention back. She walked tall into the interview room. She'd pulled herself back into the zone. There were 15 minutes of crisp exchanges, rapid-fire questions, and confident replies. Her experiences and aspirations dovetailed well with the job as described, and she felt she had a real shot. The older man in front of her folded his arms and leaned back in his chair and started asking a very different series of questions about her personal likes and interests, sports, movies, music, her friends, and places she wanted to visit. It was unusual, but not bizarre. It made her feel good, actually, that he was now looking to see how she'd fit in their corporate culture. She felt very positive. So his next question threw her for a 6. "What part of Kerala are you from?" And that's the last thing she remembered when she came to and found herself still sitting in the room, alone, her cheeks wet with tears, her heart heavy with long hoarded secrets, and no idea of the 20 minutes that seemed to have passed and what she'd said or done in them. She did her best to pull herself together, picked up her stuff and got ready to leave. She'd blown her dream job and she was furious with herself, her mum, and even with Chaco. What terrible bloody timing! She approached the woman who'd been keeping track of the interviewees. She should at least say thank you and bye, whatever else. The woman looked at her inquisitively, but also solicitously. "Are you better, dear? Sir said you were feeling unwell and asked me to let you rest, but to check on you in half an hour. I was just coming." Sandhya assured her she was okay and thanked her and her boss for their consideration. "He's asked you to wait. Can you?" the woman asked, and Sandhya nodded, wondering what it was about. "He's continuing the other interviews in the boardroom, but you can go back and sit in the waiting area." "Are you sure you're okay? Would you like something to eat or drink?" Sandhya repeated she was okay and trudged off, lugging her laptop bag to the now almost empty waiting area. Memories pushed relentlessly into her head, and she felt she was drowning too. Chaco had liked them both well enough when they first went, but with each successive visit, there'd been 4, his attitude had hardened. He'd always been the blue-eyed boy at home, firstborn son of a firstborn son, destined to carry the family name into the future and keep its star shining. And yet these interlopers, especially his primary rival, Sanjay, seemed to get all the attention when they came. Everything was geared to their likes and dislikes, and Sanjay was given priority over him, Chaco. And his initial friendliness towards his city cousins had turned bitter inside him. He was older and stronger and the host, as he was reminded 100 times a day, and he must generously give to them, and he knew fighting would only push him further into disfavor. Sandhya he tolerated. He didn't consider her a challenge. But he encouraged Sanjay to climb trees he knew shouldn't be climbed, and deliberately, or so she'd convinced herself, lost him in the crush when they went to the market. Sanjay himself saw none of this, nor did any of the adults, nor had she at the time. But she'd had 23 years to play it over in her head, and she'd started seeing patterns. They'd all adored their golden big brother Chaco and trooped behind him like a tiny contingent, hanging on to his every word and action. The breath-holding was a common game in the water. So was splashing each other and trying to touch the bottom and playing tag and leapfrog and swimming races. But this time, Chaco said he'd hold them under to help them hang on a bit longer. Susan wasn't with them that day. She was laid up in bed with a fever or something. Sanjay and Sandhya both agreed readily, and with Chaco holding them down, they each increased their count and were super excited. It was tough though, and she remembered kicking and scratching him, but he made her hold on a few more counts, and so she came up spluttering and bursting for breath, but delighted at the rising count. Once more, last time, Chaco exhorted Sanjay, and he held his nose and jumped in. Chaco held him down and Sanjay kicked, and Sandhya jumped and clapped excitedly because it was going on really long. When Chaco finally pulled Sanjay up, she didn't even realize that anything was wrong. She was squealing, but Chaco shouted at her urgently to go call somebody from the house. Quickly, run! And she saw Sanjay looking blue and ran as fast as her little legs could carry her, and they pounded down to the water with their mundas flying open behind them. But it was too late. Too late for Sanjay. She sat there in the warm waiting room, shivering and shaking as she experienced the horror all over again. Cursing her own cluelessness, even though she'd been only 7. How was she to have known better? But she should have. The visceral hatred she'd developed for Kerala, for her grandparents' lovely old home, and for Chaco in particular, had shrouded her mind and heart in a blackness, and she'd point blank refused to go back, going crazy every time it was even suggested, till they stopped bringing it up entirely. As she grew older, she'd put all those horrors in a box, sealed it, and refused to look at it again. But Mama's phone call had thrown open the locks, and the demons wafted menacingly around her as she waited her summons, knowing that wasn't going to be good news either. She took herself off once more to the washroom and splashed cold water on her face and neck. She felt calmer when she returned. She decided she'd actually try to think about what Mama had suggested. Going back, sometime, if not this time. She promised herself she'd try. And just then, the interview controller called her. Sir was ready to see her. How was she to apologize when she didn't even know what she'd done? He was on the phone and waved her to a seat. As soon as he put the phone down, she burst into confused apologies. Driving him from his own room, how could she apologize enough? He let her run her shot, and when she was done, he said very simply, "I'd like to offer you the post, Sandhya. I know something major happened today, you don't need to say what, so I have to ask you, are you still interested?" She just gaped at him. It was unbelievable. The tears rolled down her cheeks again, and he calmly offered her his clean white handkerchief. She accepted it, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not normally like this. But I got some unsettling news as I waited outside today, and it brought back many bitter memories. And I just never expected this. I thought I'd lost it for sure. I can't believe you'd consider me after all my hysterics. Yes, I heard about that. I'm hoping every day with you will not be like this. And I'm going to give you a chance in that hope, so don't let me down. Now pull yourself together and be off with you, and you'll get an email to confirm the details. You may keep the handkerchief. I won't let you down, sir, I assure you, she answered gamely. And I'll bring back the handkerchief properly washed and ironed on my first day of work as a token of good faith. Thank you, sir, thank you so much. She fled the room. The black rage she'd felt in her secret heart all these years seemed to have leaked away with the tears. Perhaps it was just time to let go. She found it in her to consider for the first time that Chaco's actions may not have been premeditated, that it may just have been a childish prank gone horribly wrong, and that he may have lived with the massive guilt all these years himself, including with the knowledge that she'd held him culpable. She found herself out in the bustling street. A thin drizzle had started, but she wasn't bothered. She groped in her bag for her phone and punched the buttons. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Mama?" Learning obedience. Ramu Kaka and Lajo Kaki are our neighbors. They aren't related to us, but we call them Kaka and Kaki out of respect. It was nothing special in our village for women to get fat in the belly and have babies. But apparently it was a big deal if the woman was Lajo Kaki. for this was after 17 years of marriage. I must have been 7 when they had this child, a girl, and they were so delighted that Ramu Kaka hauled out a rusty old rifle that none of us had ever seen and sent off a flurry of shots in the air to celebrate. The silly baby got frightened by the noise and cried for hours, refusing pacification, and Lajo Kaki made Kaka swear that he'd never touch the rifle again. We boys were massively disappointed because obviously that meant we could never touch it either, of course. They named the girl Dulari, meaning beloved, but I renamed her Tortoise years later, for she always disappeared into the house as soon as she saw me. I was something of an oddball in our village and in our family because I enjoyed studies. My elder siblings dumped their homework on me, and I loved it. We got caught, of course. The teachers figured out that all 6 siblings could not have the same handwriting. But the result was good for me. I was dispatched for special classes with the senior teacher, who put me on a path of advanced studies and even battled my father on my behalf. Babuji, that's my father, wanted me to start work in the fields, like my elder brothers. But Masterji wouldn't hear of it. So I was sent to Patna to live with Masterji's elder brother and study in his school. The school wasn't great, and none of the teachers cared for me as much as Masterji had. But there was a library, and I started to have dreams and aspirations beyond my station and my father's pocket. I went home only once a year in the summer. I spent time with my mother and worked with my brothers in the fields and started noticing many things that could be done differently. Whenever a solution I'd devised worked, my mother would be thrilled and I enjoyed her pleasure. But Babuji was more difficult to please. "Things are not done that way here," he'd say. I studied in the library and would come home bursting with ideas. But Babuji would never agree. He'd have been furious if he'd known I was studying for a scholarship to agricultural college. I loved my village, you see, and didn't want to live in the city, but I wanted to make a difference. When I earned the scholarship, Babuji was incensed. Not just for being lost to him for another 4 years, but for going about it behind his back. He knew he couldn't defy the 2 Masterji brothers who were so much on my side. And he could only roar that I needed to be taught obedience. So I lucked out. But I felt unappreciated and was deeply unhappy. One home trip, when I was visiting Ramu Kaka, he asked me why I was always sad. And I blurted out the whole saga. I was in my 2nd year of college by then, and I was learning so much that I desperately wanted to bring home. He gave me a sympathetic listen and then made me a wild offer. A tiny quarter of his plot on which to try my newfangled schemes. I asked him why he was willing to take such a risk, and he told me what no one else had bothered to. That the tortoise's wedding had been fixed and a rich dower provided as per his means, and on the happy day, the groom's family had arrived with music and dancing, and in his happiness, Ramu Kaka had brought out that rusty old rifle after all those years and shot off another fusillade. "Did she cry again?" I asked him jokingly. "She didn't," he reassured me, but one of the bullets grazed the bridegroom, and he'd immediately turned his horse around and left, refusing to marry this bad luck girl. With that terrible label on her, his darling Dulari was now doomed. No one would marry her, even though he'd burned the wretched gun and been more viciously sorry for his own stupidity than he could possibly express. So now he had to create a farm that a woman could manage. He wouldn't live forever. I was sad for her, but it was an incredibly lucky break for me. My only proviso was secrecy. Babuji shouldn't get to know. No one in my family had studied past Standard 8. They thought it a waste of time. They said I was learning city ways, becoming argumentative. So I never informed anyone when I quietly graduated and took a job on a commercial farm.
I had to live on the farm, so I left Senior Masterji's house with his blessings, which I deeply appreciated, for had my father come to know, I'd have been roundly cursed. My employer wanted the new scientific knowledge, and between him and me and Ramu Kaka back home, we started making headway. Huge leaps where all it took was better seeds from the government seed bank and smarter irrigation. Not much where it required us to use our judgment. But judgment grows with time, and I had a powerful drive to succeed. I hadn't been back home in 4 years, and the clamour for me to return and pick up my share of work, and to get married, I should add, was increasing. Especially since Ramu Kaka next door seemed to be prospering in a most unprecedented manner, given he had only himself, and here with 3 sturdy sons in the field, Babuji couldn't match him. I was commanded to return for Diwali. I hedged, but my mother insisted, and I couldn't deny her. It would be a chance to check out Ramu Kaka's fields, which made it tempting. I'd seen pictures, and we'd discussed everything threadbare, but seeing with your own eyes is completely different. The truth is, I sat down on the road and cried. It was such a fabulous sight. Green and plump and lush next to Babuji's crop, not bad, but looking undernourished and dry in comparison. Such a vindication of my education. I didn't know whether telling him would be easier or harder as a result, but it would need to be done. After meeting all the family and handing over the city-bought gifts, I ambled over to Ramu Kaka and Laju Kaki's to take them their gifts and discovered something else that had quietly been changing in 4 years. Dulari. She'd taken over the house from her mother, and her watchful presence was everywhere. I hadn't realized how old Kaka and Kaki had got, or how feeble, and how much the tortoise was now the main pillar of the family. It struck me she must be in her early 20s, and more than passing attractive, yet still unmarried. What I heard from my brothers with the slightest prodding was that any of the village boys would have married her in a snap. But none of the parents would accept her with her bad luck label. The next morning I was out early to inspect Babuji's fields and see what improvements I could suggest when I was summoned by Kaka. We chatted for a few minutes, and he insisted it was time he broke the secret to my father, and I thanked him for undertaking the difficult job. He mentioned Dulari, and I expressed my distress that she'd been given such a sad label. I told him I didn't believe it. She'd brought him and Kaki much good luck. He looked oddly at me, and I reassured him that she was a lovely girl. Any man would be lucky. He patted my shoulder pensively and sent me off to the fields. He was going to meet Babuji. I did a thorough survey of the land. There were at least a dozen changes that could be made for free or at hardly any cost at all. Our fields, only slightly larger than Kaka's, had to support my parents and 3 sons and their families. It was a good thing I'd chosen to live away. If they'd only listened to me, yields could be much better. Let's see if Ramu Kaka had any luck in convincing him. I didn't go straight home. I opted to meet some old school friends, all married now with a posse of kids. But I had to go home eventually, and had hardly washed my hands and face when I heard Babuji's voice ring out, commanding my presence. "Let him eat first," said Ma. But no, I had to report immediately. I was nervous, but ready to do battle. I entered his room and greeted him respectfully. He stared at me a long time before summoning me to sit beside him. I obeyed. "You've done many good things for Ramu Kaka, it seems. From tomorrow, you will start doing them for your parents also." I was so stunned that I slipped down to the ground at his feet, struck dumb with gratitude. He stroked my hair, more lovingly than I can ever remember. Yes, I have decided to give your new theories a chance. Ramu Kaka assures me that I won't regret it. Imagine helping a neighbor before helping your own father. Don't think that you won't be punished for this. I thought that was most unfair. I'd cried myself hoarse trying to help. It was he who had refused to listen. But I stayed down, head bowed and silent. Yes, you will have to be punished. You've been running from us for too long. I will have to fix you here. And there is only one certain way. You will get married. My head snapped up. This was over the top. But before I could even open my mouth, he roared, "Silence! None of those city ways! I will not have disobedience! The girl is chosen. Your mother and I like her. Her parents will accept you, wayward as you are. Your mother will speak to the priest and confirm a date. It is decided. You will get used to the idea soon enough. Dolari is a good girl and no bad luck to anyone." It took a few seconds for me to register that properly. I let my head drop down to conceal the joy that was flooding through my body like butter spreading on a hot paratha. But I suspect there were no secrets from Babuji. "Do you accept my authority in this matter?" he thundered at me. "I do, Babuji," I replied, humbly and obediently.